What is up, party people? Welcome back to my channel. I'm Jamila. This is JemilaBeReadin, because I do be reading. And it's finally time to talk about my best books of 2024. So as per usual, I don't like to talk about my top books in any particular order. I just find it way too stressful to try to put them in any sort of ranked order. I do have a top 10, and I will say number 10 is number 10 if we were to rank it, and that's simply because I gave it a 4.75 stars, and then the other 9 books were 5 stars, so those are in no particular order. But before I talk about my top 10 books of 2024, I did want to go through what I'm now realizing is quite the stack of honorable mentions. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about these books. I've talked about most of these in wrap-ups and in other videos if you want to see my more full thoughts on those, but I'm going to try to get through these so that we can spend more time on my actual top 10. And yeah, I would love to know your top books, your favorite books. Let me know in the comments down below. Let's get into it. Starting off with a historical romance, and that is Rebel by Beverly Jenkins. I think I gave this one like a 4.25 stars, but I just had such a blast reading this book. It's my first Beverly Jenkins. I'm very excited to read more of her works in 2025. And this is following Valinda, who is in New Orleans. She is a teacher, and she gets saved in this situation by this man named Drake, and then we just watch as she kind of gets involved with his family, and they fall in love, you know, as romance is. I just thought this was so much fun. Drake was just very charming, and I really liked their relationship, and I also like watching Valinda's own personal journey and growth as she tried to figure out what she wanted to do and how she wanted to, I guess, make use of herself in this post slavery era. And yeah, I really like this one. Next up, I have Convenience Store Woman by Sayaka Murata. This is my first from this author. This has been on my TBR for so long, and I finally got around to reading it. I listened to the audiobook, which I highly recommend, and this is just following our main character, Keiko, who is 37 years old. She is a convenience store worker, and we're just following her and her life as we watch societal pressures descend upon her, and you have a lot of people in her life asking her why, you know, she's 37 and still working at a convenience store, how she's not really progressing in her career, and she is also single, and then she also meets this man who works at the convenience store, and they kind of have a very interesting relationship. But I just really enjoyed this. I loved Keiko. I loved being in her mind, and I just related a lot to her and her situation as well. And it was very good. If you're looking for something quick and easy, I would check this one out. Next up, I can hear some people. I can hear some people already fixing their mouths to say #1 Allie Hazelwood fan. Anyways, I have Not in Love by Allie Hazelwood, which is truly a shock to me because I didn't think I liked Allie Hazelwood books, and for some reason this year her new releases and also one that came out last year really worked for me. I don't know, but Not in Love was the best one. I give this one 4 stars, and I just think that she writes like tension and yearning so well. There's a lot of other cringy factors in there that prevent this book from being like a 5-star experience for me, but I just really loved what was going on here. This is also a little bit different than her other books. She even describes in an author's note that this is a little bit more of like an erotic romance, and I just really appreciated how the sex and the eroticism in this story like helped propel the actual romance. I thought it really worked and came together well. I think a lot of people will look at this and just be like, oh my god, it's smutty, but like it felt like intentional smuttiness, I guess, if you even want to call it that. But this is following Rue and Eli. Rue works for this biotech company as an engineer, and Eli and his I think they're, what are they? He's some sort of businessman, not a hedge fund, one of those other things. He's trying to buy out this company basically, and Rue is like really good friends with the owner of the company, and there's like this whole situation going on, and she starts to kind of fall in love with Eli, but then is like, oh, I can't betray the owner of this company. That part was really contrived and it really annoyed me, so I will say that's another reason why this book did not become a 5-star experience for me. But I just really enjoyed it. I did. And yeah, that's all I'm gonna say about that. Next up, we have The Broken Kingdoms by N.K. Jemisin. This is book 2 in the Inheritance trilogy. Each book is following a different protagonist, but it has characters from past books involved, and you do need to read them in order. But I think this takes place like 10 years after the events of the 100,000 Kingdoms, and we're following Ori, who is a blind artist, and she also has some sort of magical abilities related to her art, and she ends up meeting this homeless man, and this kind of takes her on this wild journey, and there's like a conspiracy going on with the gods in this world, and there's someone who are murdering godlings, and Ori and this mysterious man are trying to figure it out, and again they get caught up in this whole journey, and there's also a little bit of a romance as well. And I really like this series. I think more people need to read this series. Obviously, the Broken Earth trilogy is goated, one of my favorites of all time, but I really love this trilogy as well. This is probably my least favorite of the 3 books. I gave this one a 4 stars, but I still really enjoyed it. And I'm gonna talk a little bit more about this series in my top 10, so I'll leave it at that. 2 books that I kind of want to talk about in tandem are Winterkeep and Sea Sparrow. If you know me and interact with me a lot, or have been watching my channel for a while, you'll know that the Graceling Realm series is one of my all-time favorite series, and the first 3 books came out when I was like a youth to teenager, like around middle school, early high school for me, and I loved those. I've reread them so many times, like it's just been solidified as one of my favorites. And then in 2021, she released Winterkeep, the author, and then the following year released Sea Sparrow, and I have been putting off these 2 books for so long because I have such a love for the original 3 books, and I was just scared, especially because this was happening as like a lot of like books from that were popular from when I was a teenager were getting like spin-offs or instead like new books in the series, and I was like, is this a cash grab? Like, is this gonna be as good? I was just really worried, but I really wanted to read both of these this year, and I did, and I'm happy to report that I loved both of them. Neither of them, well, with the exception, Winterkeep is probably my least favorite of all 5 now, but I really enjoyed it. This is book 4. This is following a few years, 5 years, I think, after the events of Bitter Blue. And Bitter Blue is a main character in this, but she's not, this is actually a multi-POV book, it's the only multi-POV book in the whole series, and I think it's a little bit to its detriment. But Bitter Blue was one of the POVs, but we're mainly following Lovisa, a new character who is the daughter of these 2 politicians in this newer land called Winterkeep. It's kind of steampunk-esque. They have some new interesting technology that differs from what we've seen from like the 7 Kingdoms or even the Dells in the previous books. And Bitter Blue is, trying to develop like political relations with Winterkeep, and she is on her way to Winterkeep, and some things happen, and so we're following Lovisa mainly, and then we have Bitter Blue, and then also Gideon as a main character, and then we have this Arctic fox as a character, and then we have this creature thing as a character. And like I said, while I appreciated having all of these POVs, I don't know that it necessarily helped all that much with the story, but I like this. I like that the vibes were a little bit different. This is definitely the book in the series that has the most like political machinations and musings, and really trying to like understand political workings and like what is the best way to help people. And yeah, I really liked it. I liked Lovisa as a character. This was a 4-star for me, but yeah, it was a good installment. And then Sea Sparrow is the 5th book. This is following Hava, who is a character that we're introduced to in Bitter Blue, and this is following directly the events of Winterkeep. Some things happen. I'm trying to talk about it without spoiling, because there's a whole lot of stuff. There's some things happen that lead to some peril, and these people this is basically a survival story, and we're following Hava, who just want to give her a hug. I love Hava a lot, and I think this is a really good pairing with Bitter Blue. Both really deal with grief and overcoming trauma and the aftermaths of like a very big traumatic event that not only has personal stakes and impact, but also had such large impact on the world and the country and the kingdom that they're from, and how to move forward. It's so good. It's so good. This one was a 4.5 star for me. I really enjoyed this. I just love this series so much, and I'm happy that these ended up being good, and I feel like they're worthy installments for the whole series. So yeah. Then we have a couple of nonfiction. I have The Message by Ta-Nehisi Coates. This is my first Ta-Nehisi Coates, and I think I talked a lot about this in my most recent wrap-up video. I'd been kind of avoiding Ta-Nehisi Coates for a while, just because in 2014, so a decade ago, he wrote an article called The Case for Reparations, in which he uses Israel as a case example, and that always like rubbed me the wrong way, and I was a little bit iffy about picking up his works, but he actually addresses that article in here, which I thought was great to see. But this is as if he's writing, I don't know if he's like writing to students or his journalism students, or to who, but he's basically he's grappling with how stories and reporting and journalism can expose and also like distort or influence our realities. And this is split into 3 parts. The first part takes place in Senegal. It's Coates' first time going to Africa. And then he goes to South Carolina, where one of his books is being banned, and he is meeting with a librarian, or I think it was a teacher, who is fighting against this book banning. And then I'd say the most significant chunk of this book is about Palestine, and he goes to Palestine. He's invited by like some sort of like Palestinian writers group, and he goes and is experiencing it for the first time, and just like learning and unlearning a lot of things. And I thought this was really well done. He's an incredible writer. I listened to the audiobook, which he narrates, and I thought it was really good. This was a 4-star for me, simply because again, like I said previously, it does feel very like introductory, and that's just not where I'm at in my journey. But I think I would highly recommend this for everyone to read. It was really good. It's very well written and very powerful. Another nonfiction, one that I read at the beginning of 2024, and that's really stuck with me for the whole year, and that is Who is Wellness For by Fariha Rosen. This is kind of part memoir, part musings about the wellness industry. I would say if you're thinking something akin to like the podcast maintenance phase, I would not consider that for what this is doing. It's more of like a big picture look at wellness and how white supremacy and capitalism and just like living in America in general impacts wellness. And she does talk a lot about her own experiences, which are pretty harrowing, so I would definitely recommend checking out content warnings for this. But I just really liked it. There was some really great lines in here that really stuck out to me. And it just made me think a lot about how our wellness and just like health in general is tied to white supremacy and capitalism, and just like how working to the bone impacts us, not being able to take breaks, beauty standards, all that stuff. It's just really good, and I highly recommend it. All right, next up is Several People Are Typing by Calvin Kasulke. This was such an interesting little book. This is all written exclusively in Slack messages, which is such an interesting method. But this is following Gerald, who is a mid-level employee in New York, based in public relations, and he gets accidentally uploaded into Slack, and he's stuck, and he's trying to get unstuck. Meanwhile, Slackbot is slowly like taking over him and his real life body. And it's just so interesting. There's a lot of interesting musings about life and what makes you human. And then there's also a little bit of a romance that goes on in here too. And it was just really funny and really poignant at times, and it was just a good time. I really liked this one. It was pleasantly surprising to me, but I didn't really know what to expect going into it, but I really liked this one. Next up is Little Rot by Akwaeke and Emezi, which the conversation around this book is so interesting to me, and you know what, I'm gonna say something controversial. What I'm gonna say is, I think the people that don't like this book just don't get it. I just don't think you get it. I'm sorry to say. I think there's a lot of people who are being weirdly like Puritan about this book and acting like one of the characters in this book who is very Puritan and Christian. This is a book that is following 5 perspectives. It takes place over the course of about 48 hours in New Lagos, where a lot of dark and harrowing and crazy and fucked up things are happening. And all of these things are not presented as good, but it's kind of just presented. We're just presented this story, and I think it's very clear that some of these things are very bad. And then there's also other things that are just like maybe a little bit morally gray, but I think a lot of people are struggling with this book because this book isn't telling them how to feel about these things. This book is just presenting it to you. It's a story, and you take it as you will. And I think a lot of people are struggling with that. I just thought it was so propulsive and so well written, and I thought it was just really interesting. These things happen. The things that happen in this book are happening in real life, so I just think it's really interesting that people are being so weird about it and acting like this is like the most fucked up thing ever, which is really interesting because I've also seen people who feel that way about this book that are also like dark fantasy or dark romance readers, and I'm like, I'm a little bit confused by what's going on here. But I really like this. I could not put this one down. I was staring at a wall for like 30 minutes after reading it. I thought it was great. I liked it a lot. So, and last for my honorable mentions, this has already taken like 20 minutes just to get through these, is A Love Song for Ricky Wilde by Tia Williams. I debated on putting this one on here. It was, I don't want to say disappointing. It was a little bit of a letdown because I came in with such high expectations because I absolutely adored 7 Days in June. And this one wasn't as good, I will say. But ultimately, I just thought it was so magical, and I do think about it from time to time. This is following Ricky Wilde. She is like the youngest child in her family, a little bit of a black sheep compared to her sisters, who are all very successful, are involved in the family business, are really put together, and she's kind of floundering, trying to figure out what it is she wants to do with her life. And ultimately, she ends up moving to Harlem, New York from Georgia, to open a flower shop. She gets this opportunity because she meets this older woman who allows her to stay with her and use the bottom of her brownstone as a flower shop. And so she does that, and one day she meets this mysterious man in a community garden, and that kind of just sets them on this very interesting romance and a little bit of a magical journey. We're also following a POV that's set during the Harlem Renaissance of a jazz musician, and I just thought it was really fun. I thought it was a unique take, and I appreciate it for like taking the risk. And I think ultimately it landed for me, and it was just a fun time. So I'm scared. Hey, it's editing me here, and I realized that I forgot to mention one book for this honorable mentions list, and that is Funny Story by Emily Henry, which I gave a 4.5 stars. I really enjoyed it, which was great because I really didn't like Happy Place, which came out last year, and I wasn't sure how to feel going into Funny Story, but I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed the main characters and their relationship development and their journeys, and I really liked Miles. I thought he was the most interesting of Emily Henry's male protagonists, love interests. He's a little bit different, where a lot of them can feel kind of similar to me, but he felt a little bit more different, a little less put together, and I appreciated that. I really liked him as a character. I don't understand the comparisons to Nick from New Girl. I'm sorry. I don't get it. I don't agree, and I'm going to end it on that. Let's get into my top 10 books. These are my creme de la creme of 2024. Again, number 10 is firmly number 10, and that's because I gave it a 4.75 stars, although honestly upon reread it might go up, and that is The Past is Red by Catherine M. Valenti. This is a little short sci-fi dystopian novel that is following our main character Tetley, who is the most hated girl in Garbage Town. Now this is in a post-climate disaster Earth where there is no landmass. Basically, humans are living on top of giant piles of garbage that have fused together, and it's just kind of floating around in the water. And there are patches that are like kind of different neighborhoods, and Tetley is from Garbage Town, and she's the most hated girl. And I just thought this was such an interesting and refreshing novel. It's very voicey, I will say. Tetley has a very strong voice and sense of self, and I think that if you find her voice annoying, you're not going to like the book, which is fine. But it really worked for me. We're kind of following this in parts, her childhood, her teenage years, which kind of tell us why she ended up becoming the most hated girl, and then her adult life. And she's just the most aggressively optimistic person, like almost angrily optimistic. There's so many people around her who have like a different sense of optimism. They're wishing for things to go back as they were, or to find a better way to live so that they're not living on floating garbage anymore. And she is just so like, this is the lot that we have. Like, humans before us fucked shit up. They call us, I guess, basically us, the people who led to climate disaster, fuckwits. And she's like, we cannot repeat those mistakes. We have to keep pushing forward, and we have to be fine with what we have right now. And it's so interesting to see that dynamic. I just really loved this book. There were parts of this that made me emotional, and I just really enjoyed Tetley as a main character. So, yeah. Next up is another Akwaeke Emezi, and that is Bitter by Akwaeke Emezi. This is the prequel to Pet, and honestly, I feel like recommending them in tandem, but I didn't read them in the same year. But this is following Bitter, who is Pet's mother. We are back in the city of Lucille, which looks a lot different from Pet's Lucille, which is a lot nicer. The world is similar to ours, in a state of disarray. There are a lot of youths protesting. There's a lot of violence and police brutality. There is a huge divide in class dynamics and poverty. And Bitter, amongst all of this, is an artist. And she is very afraid to get involved in fighting against the oppressive systems of this world. All she wants to do is kind of keep her head down and make her art. and she gets the chance to go to this art school that is kind of like protected off from the rest of the world. And she meets a lot of different people and makes friends who are involved in protesting. And there's like an interesting dynamic of them like pushing and pulling and wanting her to join, but she doesn't want to, but also feeling bad that she doesn't. And I think really what this book is tackling and trying to say is that when it comes to, I guess, like revolution or fighting oppressive forces, there's no one right way to do so. Everyone has their role, and it looks different for everyone. And while there might be people on the front lines who are fighting, there are also people like Bitter who make art and are able to put together the emotions and the thoughts of what people are feeling and encourage them in that way. And I just really liked this book. Me, for every book that I say in my best books of 2024, I just really liked this book. It just, I loved it. I loved it a lot, and highly recommend it, as I would all of these books, I guess. Next up, I have There's Always This Year on Basketball and Ascension by Hanif Abdurraqib. This is my first book by this author. Definitely not going to be my last. This book was just so excellent. I listened to the audiobook for this one, and this is, I think, like many of his other works, part memoir, part musings and essays about the world, using pop culture to kind of talk about his thoughts about the world and make sense of the world. And in this case, it's basketball, and I am a basketball fan, so that added to this. But I know there's a lot of people who don't like basketball that also really loved this, and I think you don't need to like basketball to love this as well. This is split into different parts, similar to like quarters in a basketball game. I know about sports. And he also uses kind of like LeBron James and his story to kind of talk about different things. Gosh, I'm just trying to figure out how I want to talk about this book. I just found myself so deeply and emotionally invested in this book. I think the biggest thing, my biggest takeaway from this book is just how Hanif Abdurraqib talked about like his city and his love for this city, and kind of like a love-hate relationship with his city, and people leaving and coming and going, and same thing with LeBron leaving the Cavaliers and coming back. Yeah, it really resonated with me, especially like I live in Portland, and I feel like I have a very love-hate relationship having grown up here, and I just felt that. And he's just such an incredible writer. Like, I just can't imagine what a gift to be able to write about something that you love so eloquently. I feel like I'm getting emotional already thinking about this book. It was incredible. I really, really loved this book. Another book that I really loved, obviously, was James by Percival Everett. So many people have this on their best of list, as they should. This book was incredible. I've never read a book by this author, but I really want to read more. I watched American Fiction, which is a movie that's adapted from his book Erasure. But this is a Huckleberry Finn reimagining, where it's following an enslaved character from that book named Jim. Now James, well, also Jim, but full name James, and his story. I have never read Huckleberry Finn. I have not read anything by Mark Twain. I'm actually not even very familiar with what the story is about. So as far as this being a retelling or a reimagining, I cannot commentate on how well it does it, or how it's in conversation with Huckleberry Finn, but just as a book, I just found myself so invested in James as a character. This is another one where I listened to the audiobook. The audiobook's incredible, and I just was so invested in his journey. He runs away he's enslaved. He runs away from plantation when he finds out that he's about to be sold and separated from his family, and then he kind of also, Huckleberry Finn's on his journey too, and they're kind of in and out on this journey together, and we're just watching him go on this journey and meet various people. And it's just so interesting to see, like, even back then, the code switching that was happening and how they had to dumb themselves down and have their own language of how white enslavers viewed enslaved people and their ability to even just speak or understand the world, and also just interacting with other enslaved people who were just so committed to their masters. It was so interesting. I honestly was thinking a lot about Kindred while reading this book as well. But it was so good. It was so well written. I was so invested in James as a character. Yeah, I'm excited to read more from Percival Everett. Everyone's telling you to read this. I'm also now telling you to read this. Incredible. Next up is The Kingdom of Gods by N.K. Jemisin. This is the third and final book in the Inheritance trilogy. This is I think my favorite of the trilogy. I go back and forth because I really did love the 100,000 Kingdoms, but I think this one kind of edges it out for me a little bit. This one, this whole series is just so fascinating. So this is following Shia. I actually have no idea how to pronounce it, but he is a character that we see throughout the series. We're first introduced to him in the 100,000 Kingdoms. He is a godling. So in this world, there are gods. There are 3 gods who were spit out by the malevolence, I think is what it's called. And they basically created the world. And they also were like in love with each other. But their offspring from each other are godlings. And the godlings have their own powers as well too. But Sia is like the first godling so he's like the first child of the gods. And his thing, his personality, his being is like childhood, and all that comes with it. So he often appears as a child. He's very evil in the way that a child is, and also good in a way that a child is. But for the first time, out of nowhere, something that the gods have never seen, he is starting to he loses his immortality and is starting to age. So, and this happens after he meets these 2 young children who end up becoming older throughout the book. There's a lot of time skips that happen. Shahar and Decca, who are twins, and they have to like figure out why this is happening and how to stop him from aging because he's gonna die. And it's just, this whole series, but this book in particular, is such a fascinating look and interpretation of gods and immortality. It's truly fascinating. I feel like I've never really read a book or a series that followed gods, fantasy or otherwise, that was as interesting as this. Like, I think N.K. Jemisin does such a good job of showing such a full breadth of godhood. Like, these people suck, right? They suck, but there's also a lot of good that they do, and there's a lot of like weird choices that they make, and there's just a lot of things that, you know, I think a lot of us would find weird that's happening, but it's so fascinating, and it kind of humanizes them in a way. And yeah, I really love this one. I love Sia as a character. He was always one of my favorites throughout the series, and just also watching him go through his own personal journey, especially when it comes to forgiveness, in particular with this one other character who has caused such turmoil and a lot of stuff happening. And just especially after the events of the first book as well, where the gods were enslaved. And yeah, it's just, N.K. Jemisin can do no wrong. What can I say? Then we have Monstruo by Gerardo Samano Cordova. This is such an interesting like literary horror book. It is following a woman named Magos who, after her son Santiago dies, she cuts out a piece of his lung and she like feeds it, and it ends up growing into this like little monster thing that she names Monstruo. And we watch as Magos and her husband and her friend and just the people around them interact with Monstruo, and how Monstruo interacts with them and affects them. It's dealing a lot with the subject of grief, with motherhood, with queerness. It's multi-POV, which is not what I was expecting, but I really appreciated it. I think it was very effectively used here. And I just, I was like so sucked in. I think with a lot of these books, it just like really just grabbed me, and I could not put it down, and I was just so interested to see where this was gonna go, and it was very emotional. Monstruo. You'll notice that all of these books made me emotional at some point. That's kind of like one of the criteria of becoming a 5-star for me. And a lot of them too, beautiful writing with something to say. I don't like beautiful writing for the sake of beautiful writing. I don't like flowery prose just for the sake of floweriness. Like, I want it to work in conversation with the plot, with the story, has something to say. You know what I mean? And that's, I think, pretty much what we see with a lot of these books that are in my top 10. But we have Open Water by Caleb Azuma Nelson. This is a love story. It's not a romance, like not genre romance, because it does not follow genre romance conventions. It's definitely literary fiction about a love story. We have two unnamed Black British artists who meet each other and develop a friendship and ultimately fall in love. And this book was just so beautifully written, and what really pulled me in was the use of music. One of the characters is very into music, and there's a lot of songs and artists that are referenced in this book, and there's actually a playlist that's on Spotify and I think Apple Music. And I think what really helped build this experience for me was I listened to the playlist as I was reading it. Whenever a song would get mentioned, I would listen to it and kind of read the little surrounding bits while I listened to the song, and it just really added to the ambiance. I just really love the conversations around Blackness and identity and love, and just there's so many good quotes. And even just like familial relationships as well, relationships to your home country. You know, Bolu Babalola says a stunning piece of art on the back. Yeah, I would agree. Then we have Beloved by Toni Morrison. This is my first full-length Toni Morrison novel that I read. My first one was Recitative, which was a short story. But this is, you know, kind of like a classic gothic horror, which I feel like a lot of people don't describe it as, but it is. It's following our main character, Setha, who was born a slave, and she escapes. And 18 years later, she is still haunted by the memories of escaping, of all of it, her enslaved life, but I think in particular, the surrounding circumstances of her escaping slavery. And she's a daughter, and she's also haunted by the ghost of a baby that died before this daughter, and this daughter is also haunted by this ghost as well, and is kind of living in the shadow of that ghost. And it's just such a harrowing story, I think, not only obviously about slavery, but also just like motherhood and the lengths that some people will go to protect their children in a way that doesn't seem like protecting their child, but also makes sense. It's really interesting because I feel like I understand the choices that Setha made, but it's really interesting to see how other people, particularly other Black people, reacted to that. But yeah, Yeah, a devastating read, as all of these are, but so good. Then we have my first James Baldwin, and this is The Fire Next Time. This is 2 essays that James Baldwin wrote for the centennial, the 100-year anniversary of the Emancipation Proclamation, and how things haven't really changed. And then it's really interesting reading this, like 40, 50 years later, and how still relevant it is. Not only was he an incredible writer, like truly an incredible writer, but it was so cutting in his commentary, and he just notices a lot. He talks a lot about Christianity and the church and how that ties into white supremacy and the subjugation of Black people. He also has like a conversation with Elijah Muhammad, who I think created the Nation of Islam, and that was so interesting to read. And his skepticism of him and just the movement in general, just because it is so like not militant. The violence is not the problem. I think he's just like, because there's such a hierarchical structure. What a writer. I'm so excited to read more from him. He also seemed like he was a funny guy. I would love to have chopped it up with him at one point in time, but alas, he's no longer with us. But yeah, The Fire Next Time, very excited to read more from him in this year. And my final book in my top 10 of 2024 is Ghost Roots by Pemi Aguda. This one kind of came out of nowhere for me. I was looking at the, what is it called? The National Book Awards, and I was looking at their shortlist, and I was kind of vaguely had the intention of reading the shortlist, which I'm kind of still doing, but this was shortlisted for fiction. This is a collection of short stories, which is also interesting to me because I'm not really a short story reader, or a short story collection reader. It's not usually what I gravitate towards, but this was so good. Every single short story was so effective, and it worked really well with each other. This is set in Nigeria, and we're in Lagos. Let me just read how it's described here. These and other stories in Ghost Roots map emotional and physical worlds that lay bare the force of family, myth, tradition, gender, and modernity in Nigerian society. Powered by a deep empathy and glinting with humor, they announce a major new literary talent. Each story is a little bit speculative, I think inspired by various like Nigerian like folklore. And each one is so deeply unsettling. And I'll read a short story and I'm like, damn. And then I'll read the next one and I'm like, damn. Each one, it was just so impactful. I had my favorites. Let me look here. I read this from the library, so I wasn't able to like mark up anything. I actually just like ordered this and got it literally right before I sat down to film this video. But the first one, Manifest, wow, what a opener. 24 Alhaji Williams Street, also one I think about a lot. The Dusk Market, The Masquerade Season, all of them. Girly too, oh my god. I think if you like short story collections, I think you should definitely check this out. I think if you don't like short story collections, I think you should still check it out. Every single short story collection, or every short story in here worked. Like, just no less than a 4-star, each one of them. Just so, I just don't know how the author was able to just like make you feel like this deep unsettling feeling throughout each book. It just, it's so incredible. I cannot wait to see what this author writes more in the future. And that is my best books of 2024. I've been yapping for what seems to be almost 47 minutes. But I did say I like talking about the books that I like. And here we are. I hope that gives you some suggestions for your TBR. Like I said, I would love to know what your top books of 2024 were. Read any of these books that I talked about? If you like them, let me know. And I will catch y'all in the next video.